Stuka Joe here. Today we'll be taking a look at this game, Berlin 1945, Fall of the Reichstag. We will take a look at the game's components, victory conditions, sequence of play, and even some examples. So, let's get this video rolling. Berlin 1945, Fall of the Reichstag is a game designed by José Rivero and published by NAC Wargames. This is a two-player, low-complexity, operational level game where one player controls the Soviet forces set to conquer Berlin and the Reichstag, while the other player controls the German forces desperately scrambling to defend the city and make the Soviet advance as costly as possible. The game includes a 34 by 22-inch mounted map board, 130 counters, which are 5/8 of an inch and have rounded corners, 50 cards, one player aid, one Soviet orders sheet with a hiding screen, one rulebook, one playbook, and two 10-sided dice. The game box includes separate English and Spanish sets of cards, player aids, rulebooks, and playbooks. The map board shows the city of Berlin divided by areas. The areas closest to the edge, A to F, appear in a light tan color. These are starting areas for Soviet units. German units can never enter these areas. The remaining 19 areas in dark gray are called districts, and they are organized in 3 rings. The outer ring comprises 7 districts, and there's no stacking limits in any of these districts. The middle ring comprises 6 districts, with stacking limitations printed in each of the areas. The inner ring is comprised of 5 districts, also with stacking limitations. And this ring includes the Mitte. The Mitte is further subdivided into 5 sectors, and the game includes an inset of the Mitte for ease of play. Sector 5 is the prize for the Soviets. It represents the Reichstag. The board also has spaces for each player's removed units, as well as the game's turn record track. The game pieces are unit counters and markers. There's 35 Soviet units. Of these, 33 are in orange, and these are regular Soviet units, each with a strength of 1. The 2 remaining red Soviet units are guards units, each with a combat strength of 2. On the German side, there are 22 regular units in gray, each with a combat strength of 1, and 5 SS units in black, each with a strength of 2. There's 5 German units that show a dot. Each of these units enter the game only through the play of a specific event card. The game also includes markers to denote barricades, the Moltke Bridge, flak anti-aircraft towers, the shock army, a wave attack, control markers to denote German or Soviet control of a district, as well as order and planning markers for the Soviet player to use, and a marker for the turn record track. Each player has a deck of 25 cards. The event cards show an M and or an exclamation mark. Cards marked with an M can be used during a player's movement phase. Cards with an exclamation mark may be played at the time indicated by the card. There's also cards with a C notation. These are combat cards, and each player can only play 1 combat card per combat situation. Players receive 5 cards at the start of the game, and they draw 1 card in each of the 12 turns. Therefore, during a given game, players will have access to only 17 of the 25 cards in their respective decks, and this is a feature that increases the game's replayability. The Soviets win the game if at the end of the last turn, turn 12, the combat strength of their units inside Sector 5 in the Mitte is at least 2 times the strength of the German units there. If the Soviets fail to reach this strength level, the Germans win the game. Now, the Germans may win an automatic victory at any time from the end of turn 4 onwards if their units in all districts on the map have a greater combined combat strength than the Soviets. The turn begins with each player drawing a card from their deck. Next, the Soviet player secretly plans and records the orders for his units on the Soviet planning board. Movement is next, and the German player conducts movement first, and he also may rebuild units. After he does so, the Soviet player executes movement and rebuilds units that he had previously assigned during the planning phase. Combats are now resolved in those districts where there are units of both sides, with the German player deciding the order in which combats will be resolved. Combat resolution in this game is very straightforward. After both sides have decided to play or not play a combat card, the players compare the strengths of their armies, and the side with the higher combat strength is the winner. And then we apply casualties. In the case of a tie, each side removes 1 unit of their choice. If the winner has more combat strength than the opponent but less than double, then the loser removes 1 unit and the winner doesn't remove a unit. If the winner's combat strength is double or more than his opponent but less than 3 times, then the loser removes 2 units, but the winner has to check for possible casualties. And if the winner's combat strength is triple or more than his opponent, the loser loses 3 units, and then the winner has to check for possible casualties. And we check for casualties by rolling 1 or 2 d10s. If the loser removed 2 units, the winner rolls 1 10-sided die. If the loser removed 3 units, the winner rolls 2 10-sided dice. And for each die result of 1 to 3, the winner has to remove 1 of his own units. And finally, we have the Soviet presence check phase. During turns 1 to 11, if there are units of both sides in Sector 5 of the Mitte, nothing happens. But if there are Soviet units with no German units there, then the Soviet player may remove a German non-SS unit from anywhere on the map. Before we go into the examples, let's take a look at the 4 types of movement in this game, because there are restrictions for each type. Units can advance, they can conduct a flanking move, they can retreat, or they can withdraw. In this game, advancing is different for each of the sides. For the Russians, to advance is to move into a district or sector that is located in a ring closer to the Mitte. For the Germans, to advance is to move into a district or sector located in a ring further away from the Mitte. In order to advance to another district, there must be no enemy units in the starting district. So here, the 4 German units in District 1 cannot advance into District 6 because there's 2 Soviet units in their district. Here we see a group of Russian units in Area E. They're going to advance in the direction of the Mitte into the outer ring, District 13, and because there's no German units there, it is now under Russian control. Here we see a group of 4 German units in the inner ring, District number 1. They're going to advance away from the Mitte into District number 6, which is in the middle ring. Units in this game can also conduct a flanking move. That is a move from one district to an adjacent district in the same ring. Here we see 4 Soviet units in District 6 in the middle ring moving into District 7, which is also in the middle ring. Now, if there are enemy units in the Soviet player's initial district, these units cannot perform a flanking move. Units can also perform a retreat, and that is a move starting in a district where there are enemy units. Here, the Soviet players order a retreat from District 6, and they order 2 of their units to move, and they have to move into a district which is farther from their direction of advance, or into a district which is in the same ring. In this case, they move into District 13, which is farther from the Mitte. And the Soviets, every time they conduct a retreat, have to leave 2 units behind in the starting district, and that's why they left 2 units in District 6. Alternatively, they could have retreated 2 units into District 7, which is in the same ring as District 6. Now let's look at a German retreat from that same district, District 6. It has to be away from their direction of advance, so it has to be in the direction of the Mitte. And here we see 3 units moving into District 1. The Germans only have to leave 1 unit behind. They don't have the requirement of leaving 2 units behind that the Soviets have. So they could have moved 3 units into District 1. Alternatively, they could have moved 3 units into an adjacent district in the same ring, like District 7. And finally, there's withdrawal movement, and that is a movement of all units in a district into a district which is farther away from that side's direction of advance. Here we have 4 Soviet units in District 6 in the middle ring, and they all move into District 12, which is in the outer ring, that is further away from the Mitte. Using withdrawal movement, the only other requirement is that there are no enemy units in the starting zone, and withdrawing units can move into a district that contains enemy units. Like we see here, the 4 units, instead of moving to District 12, move into District 13, where there is 1 German unit. In this game, cards can be played in various ways. They can be played for the event shown on the card. Many of these cards show movement events as denoted by the letter M, and these are played during the movement phase. Another group of cards can only be played during combat, and these show the letter C. And there are cards that can be played for various effects and purposes, as denoted by the exclamation mark. But in this game, cards can also be discarded for a particular effect. And this can be done for the purpose of rebuilding previously eliminated units. And for this purpose, the player must discard 2 cards unrevealed at the end of his movement phase, and this allows the player to bring back 1 of his units from the eliminated box onto the map. Cards can also be discarded unrevealed for a player to gain 1 extra movement order. And for this purpose, the Soviets have to discard 2 cards, while the Germans only 1. Okay, let's go to the setup. We place a turn marker in the first turn, that is April 21 on the turn record track. We place the Moltke bridge marker between sectors 1 and 5 in the inset of the Mitte. And we place control markers showing German control in each of the districts on the map. That includes also the districts in the Mitte inset. We place the Soviet reinforcements that enter turn 4, April 24, that's 6 regular and 2 guard units. We separate the German and the Soviet cards, and we shuffle them to form 2 decks. The Soviet player draws 5 cards. The German player will draw his starting hand later. Now we place the units on the map. The Germans placed 1 regular and 1 SS unit in Sector 5 of the Mitte. These units cannot move until Soviet troops enter the Mitte. Now the German player places 18 Wehrmacht and 2 SS units in areas of the middle and outer rings. These are districts 6 to 18, and he has the requirement of having to place a minimum of 4 groups in districts of the outer ring. And here we have a sample of the German placement. Now we place the following counters to the side. They may come in later. These are German units that can come into the game by the play of specific cards. The ones you see here, like for example, Wenck's 12th Army. And we also place to the side the Shock Army, Wave Attack, Barricades, and Flak Tower markers. The Soviets now place 24 of their 27 regular units, 4 in each of the zones from A to F. These are the zones around the city of Berlin. We start with Zone A on the northwest corner. You see 4 there. 4 in the northeastern zone, which is B. 4 in the eastern zone, C. 4 in the southeastern zone, D. 4 in the southern zone, E. And 4 in the western zone, that is F. Now the Soviets have to issue orders. They can issue 3 orders, and he will be using the orders display, which has a screen, so the German doesn't know what these orders are. And the Soviets want to move all their units in Zone F into District 1. So they place a 1 marker in the destination box for Zone F. Notice that no markers have to be placed in the units box because all units will be moving to District 1. Similarly, the Soviets want to move all their units in Zone D into District 12, so they place a 12 marker in the Zone D row. And finally, the third order is to move all units in Zone E into District 13. So a 13 marker is placed in the destination box for Zone E. Now the Germans can conduct their moves, after which the Soviets will set up their last 3 units. Now the Germans conduct orders. They have 4 orders. First order will be to withdraw the 2 units they have in District 18 into District 11. And notice the small 8 right next to the 11. That's the stacking limit per side of that district. The second order will also withdraw the 2 German units in District 13 into District 6, also in the middle ring. There's 2 orders left, but the Germans will not use them. The number of German orders each turn depends on the Soviet penetration into Berlin. If Soviet units are in the outer or middle ring, the Germans have 4 orders per turn. But if Soviet forces enter the inner ring, then that is reduced to 3 orders per turn. And if they enter sectors 1 to 4 of the Mitte, it is 2 orders per turn. And if the Soviets enter Sector 5 of the Mitte, that is the Reichstag, then the Germans only have 1 order per turn. And these order levels, once reduced, are irreversible. Next, the German players dealt 5 cards. And now the Soviet player places the last 3 units on the board, not more than 2, in a particular zone. He places 1 in Zone E. Now there's 5 units there. 1 in Zone F. And 1 in Zone A. The setup has concluded and the game begins with the Soviet movement phase, 3B. Soviet player executes the movement and rebuild orders previously assigned on the planning board. And before we look at those orders and carry them out, let's take a look at the cards in the Soviet player's hand. Katyusha rockets allows the Soviets to eliminate 1 Wehrmacht unit. The wave attack allows the Soviets to place a wave attack marker in a district and overstack in that district. Ivan Konev adds an order. Battle fatigue reduces combat strength of the Germans by 1, but only from turn 4 onwards. And military trucks can be played during the Soviet movement phase. A Soviet group that ends its movement in a zone with no enemy units may move again to another zone with no enemy units. Let's carry out the Soviet orders now. We go to Zone D, all units there, to District 12. The 4 units in Zone D enter District 12. There's no German units there, so it is now under Soviet control. The next order, Zone E, all units to District 13. 5 units in Zone E occupy District 13 with no German units, and the district is also now under Soviet control. The last order, Zone F, all units to District 1. There's 5 units in Zone F. They move into District 1, Spandau. It has no German units, so now it is Soviet controlled. And notice that the Soviet player has this military trucks card, and he could play this card on any of these groups that moved into districts with no enemy units to move to other districts with no enemy units. But notice that the Soviet player would like to use this card to move into a district which is in the middle ring, and all middle ring districts that are adjacent to these groups have German units. So they're going to save this card for later. Instead, the Soviets are going to play Katyusha rockets, which allows them now, at the end of the movement phase, to choose any zone on the map and remove a Wehrmacht unit. And the Soviet player has to choose an undisputed zone that is adjacent to another zone with Soviet units. District number 7, which is adjacent to District 1, which has Soviet units. The Festungsregiment is selected as the Wehrmacht unit that is eliminated, and it is placed in the removed units box for the Germans, and it may return later if the Germans issue a rebuild order. And the Katyusha rockets card is removed permanently from the game. Next is the combat phase. Combat takes place in disputed zones, that is, zones or districts where there are units of both sides. There are no such zones, so we skip the combat phase. We go to the Soviet presence check in the Reichstag. The game has barely begun. There's no Soviet units in the Reichstag. That's the end of the first turn, April 21. Now the game moves to April 22. So we start with the draw phase, and each player will draw 1 card. Soviet player draws Insubordination, forces the German player to reveal their hand. German player draws Staff Work. This card gives the German players 2 options. He can discard this card, rebuild a Wehrmacht unit, or at the end of the Soviet movement phase, this card cancels a movement order. Let's take a look at the other German cards. General Wiedling. It's a combat card, adds 1 to the German combat strength, and the Soviet is impeded from playing certain cards. Eugène Valot, and this is a card that can only be used when an SS unit is involved, and it causes the Soviet player to suffer an additional casualty. Here we have Tactical Withdrawal, another combat card. This card allows 1 or more German units to avoid fighting in a disputed zone and move to an adjacent zone. And then we have Anti-Aircraft Fire. This card allows the German player to cancel certain Soviet cards and place a flak marker in Tiergarten if there's not one already there. Soviet Strategic Mistake. This card forces the Soviet player to reveal his hand, and the German player can choose 1 card from the hand and remove it from the game. Now we go to the Soviet planning phase. The Soviet player wants to move his units in Zone A into District 15, so he places a 15 marker in the destination box for Zone A. And the Soviet player wants to move 4 of the 5 units in District 14 into District 7. That's in the middle ring, so he places a number 4 marker in the units box, and the destination box will have a 7 marker, District 7. The Soviet player's third move will be from Zone B into District 17 with all units. So he places a 17 marker in the destination box of Zone B. And now the Soviet player, having plotted his 3 moves, now plays Ivan Koniev, and this allows him to plan and conduct another move. So now he will be planning that Zone C, the 4 units there, move also into District 17. So he places another 17 marker, this time in the Zone C destination box. Now we go to the movement phase, and the Germans begin. They have 4 moves, and they have a significant number of combat cards, so it may be a good time for an attack. The Germans move their 4 units that are in District 6 into District 12 in the outer ring. That's going to force combat with the 4 Soviet units there. The second move sees the German units in District 15 withdrawing into District number 6. Third move sees 3 German units in District 11 conducting a flanking move into District 10. And the 4th German move will be withdrawing their 2 units in District 16 into District number 6. So now we move on to the Soviet movement phase, and Soviet units move in accordance with the orders issued in the planning phase. All units in Zone A move to District 15. There's no German units there, so that district comes under Soviet control. All units in Zone B move to District 17. So 4 units in Zone B occupy District 17, and as you can see, it's a fairly large district, but all districts in the outer ring have no stacking limitations, and the next Soviet group that was ordered to move is the one in Zone C, which was also ordered to move into District 17. So now there's 8 Soviet units there, and that district comes under Soviet control. And finally, 4 Soviet units in District 14 move into District number 7. And that will cause combat in that district with the 2 German units there. Having concluded Soviet movement, we go to the combat phase, and the German player determines the order in which the combats will take place. We have combats in District 7 as well as District 12, and the Germans decide to resolve District 7 first. There's 4 Soviet units there. They are regular units, each with a strength of 1, so the total combat strength is 4, versus 2 regular German units, each with a combat strength of 1, so total German combat strength is 2. If nothing else happens, the Soviets will win this combat situation. So let's take a look at the cards that the German player may play, and the Germans always have to play their combat cards first. They have 3 combat cards. The first one, Eugène Vaulot, eliminates an additional Soviet unit, but only if there's a SS unit involved, and there's none here. General Wiedling gives the Germans a +1 to their combat strength, and the Germans don't want to play that card because it won't make any difference. They will still lose the combat because they will end up with less strength than the Soviets. It would be 4-3. So they will be playing their 3rd combat card, Tactical Withdrawal. This allows 1 or more German units to avoid fighting in a disputed zone, and they can move to an adjacent zone. And in this case, the 2 units will be moving into District 1 in the inner ring. So now District 7 comes under Soviet control. Now we resolve the remaining combat situation in District 12, 4 units on each side with a total combat strength of 4. The Germans now play General Wiedling as their combat card for this combat situation, so their combat strength increases. Let's take a look at example number 2 in the playbook. This occurs at the beginning of turn 7, April 20. Soviets, they look at their hand. They only have 1 combat card, which is not really available at this time because it can only be played from turn 4 onwards, and we're in turn 1. So the Soviets do not respond with a combat card, And the total combat strength of the Germans is 5, that of the Soviets is 4. As a result of this, the Soviets lose 1 unit, and they choose 1 unit to eliminate and place in the eliminated units box. The remaining units stay in place, so this district, District 12, is still in dispute with combat units of both sides. We go to the last phase of the turn, the Soviet presence check in the Reichstag, and there's no Soviet units in the Reichstag, so there's no effect on the rest of the board. And this is the situation at the end of turn 2. And now the turn marker moves from April 22 to turn 3, which is April 23. At the end of this turn, we see that the Soviets have penetrated the middle ring in District 7. If they move into the inner ring, they will reduce the number of German orders available per turn from 4 to 3. The Germans have lost 1 unit as well as the Soviets, and there's combat raging in District 12. This is the outer ring, so the Germans may want to move some units closer to Berlin to avoid being tied up in a battle in the outer ring. And as you can see, there's plenty of Soviet units on the map. The Germans are heavily outnumbered, but the Soviets are encumbered by the order system. So the Germans are more flexible moving units, but it seems that as the game progresses, they will have fewer orders with which to move their units and try to stop the Soviet advance. Let's take a look at example number 2 in the playbook. This occurs at the beginning of turn 7, April 27, and this is the situation at the beginning of the turn. The Soviets have an elite guard unit in district number 7. The Germans have 3 elite units, 1 in the Reichstag and 1 each in districts 3 and 4. The Germans also have a barricade in district number 1. When there's a barricade in a zone, the Soviets can only advance into that zone as many units as half the results of a 1d10 with fractions rounded down. The Soviets have assigned the following 3 orders. In District 7, 5 units move into District 1. In District 9, there's movement to 2 different districts, 5 units into District 3 and 1 unit into District 4. And finally, in District 10, all units are ordered into District 4. And now the Germans execute their 3 moves. First, in District 2, the sole unit there moves into District 1. In District 8, the unit there moves into District 9. And finally, in the Mitte, in Sector 2, the unit there moves into Sector 4. And in this game, inside the Mitte, the Germans can move between sectors even if they're not adjacent to each other. We execute the Soviet movement phase. And we begin with the orders for their units in District 9, 5 to District 3, and 1 into District number 4. But we saw that the Germans moved the unit from District 8 into District 9, so the Soviet movement order gets canceled because you cannot advance from a disputed zone. The next order was for the units in District 7, 5 of them, to advance into District 1. Now, District 1 has a barricade, so we must roll 1d10, and half of the result, fractions rounded down, is the number of Soviet units that can enter the district. The roll is a 6, so 3 Soviet units can enter. The Soviet player chooses 2 regular and 1 elite unit to enter District 1. And now we execute the orders for the units in District 10. All move into District 4. Now we resolve combat. In District 9, there's a strength of 6 for the Soviets, 1 for the Germans, so the German unit is eliminated. In this case, the Soviets don't have to remove a single unit because the losing side did not remove 2 or 3 units. The next district is District number 1. And here the Soviets have a strength of 4 because of the Guards unit. The Germans have a strength of 3. None of the sides play any cards, so the Germans lose 1 unit. And finally, in District 4, the Soviets have a strength of 5, and the Germans also have a strength of 5. That's 2 for the 2 regular units, 2 for the SS unit, and 1 for the flak marker. And neither side plays any combat card, so there's a tie, and each of the players has to remove a unit. As you can see, this is a game where each of the sides play very differently. The Soviets have the advantage of numbers. They have a huge army, but they are burdened by having to issue their orders and then carry them out, and these orders can be disrupted by the Germans. The Germans have a host of problems of their own. They are outnumbered, and they have to defend the perimeter of the city with what they have. They do have the advantage of interior lines and being able to gain more moves by discarding 1 card as compared to the Soviets that have to discard 2 to gain an extra move. In this game, much of the uncertainty and surprise comes in the form of card events. The players have hard decisions to make, whether to play a card for its event, or discard it for additional movement, or rebuilding units. This is Berlin 1945, Fall of the Reichstag, a game designed by José Rivero and published by NAC Wargames. I hope that this video has given you a good idea of the flow of the game and what the game has to offer. This is Stuka Joe, signing off for now. Thanks for watching.